Oh, Facebook, always being grumpy.
Facebook's like, do it now. Thanks,
Do it
Mark.
exactly on our time schedule, or we will
Thanks,
be
Mark
cross with you.
Zuckerberg.
I know I was talking to my mother this weekend about like tech millennials that I follow and which ones I would like to throw off a bridge. And I was explaining a lot of things to her about Mark Zuckerberg that she
Oh,
so,
good Tuesday morning, everybody. It's not Monday. We are aware it's not Monday.
although my body is not aware it's not Monday.
Yeah,
I can't
Dr.
lie.
Kristen's on the jet lag post TEDx talk hangover. We have a TEDx speaker with us this morning, everybody. Yay! If I knew how to do like graffiti, or not graffiti, I'm
Like
way
confetti.
confetti graphics. Yeah. Yay! I feel like that. I did it with my heart, which is all that matters. For those of you that may not know, Dr. Kristen spoke at TEDx South Lake Tahoe on Saturday. When we have the nicely edited link, you better believe we'll be sharing it. But everybody who's watching this live or replay, round of applause for Dr. Kristen. She absolutely smashed it. Big step for the good doctors. Big step for Dr. Kristen. We're excited to see where it takes her and us by extension. Was super excited. One of the good doctors of Abbey Research was mentioned on a TEDx stage, and I was watching the live stream, and I was like, I'm the other good doctor. That's me. I don't want to be on that stage, but I'm the other good doctor.
Yeah, you are.
It was very exciting. So henceforth, why we are here on a Tuesday, not a Monday. We were talking about next Tuesday going live, and since I will be out of town on Monday, and decided, oh yeah, today's Tuesday.
Today is in fact Tuesday, which is really bizarre. I spent almost all day yesterday on various planes. I would like to report that flying is good again. Weird, but good. Like at least all the airports I was in, I felt safe. There were too many people around me, but that's a me reaction. Not a anyone else's fault reaction. Wearing masks on planes is lame, but I'm just gonna call a spade a spade. They're not comfy, like to me, ever, but glad to do it. American has replaced all the new planes have HEPA air filters in them, which made me happy to know. And all of it was grand. Do not miss jet lag from my before times, but it was very nice to live in airports again for a little bit. Was happy to do that. Also, I've offered this on the Instagram. I'll offer it to Facebook and YouTube as well. If anyone wants me to do a live or a video about my TEDx journey and how I got there and the process of doing it and how many times I've wanted to apply and chickened out and all of those kind of things, we're happy to do that. We could even do that next Tuesday and talk through what it kind of is and the behemoth that is TED and what it all kind of means. I've answered a lot of questions recently about that. The professionally edited video that will go up on the YouTubes could be anywhere from 3 weeks to 3 months away, and it is entirely out of my control at this point. But it was a dream come true. And that is cheap for how I felt. It was a real honor. If anyone from the South Lake Tahoe team is watching this, you will know, I hope at this point I have thanked you enough times in enough tones of voice and enough degrees of tears to know that I really loved it. My fellow speakers were incredible. They will all be guests on this channel in the upcoming months and weeks. They were unbelievable.
They were so good, y'all. They were so good.
It was just a really great group of folks. And what was fascinating to me is that, every TEDx organizer picks their own through line, but they don't look at our speeches ahead of time. And so there's lots of things that we all said that the organizers didn't necessarily know. And yet we were really cohesive in this crazy way. And I bring that up because after we cover our empathy, check-ins as they were around the world, we're going to be talking about boundaries. And one of the things about boundaries is having a cohesive understanding about who you are and your goals in the world and finding people that have those same things to help you shore up those boundaries. And it was a really good reminder this weekend of what it's like to be in cohesion with other people. So I can talk about it forever, but we're going to move on because TEDx is not the only thing that happened this weekend. So let's really quick cover some empathy exercise check-ins around the world. Obviously, the biggest one, besides my triumphant TEDx experience, is that innocent people are dying in Gaza. And I laugh because
all parts of Israel and Palestine. Yeah.
I either laugh or I cry, and we're at the uncomfortable giggling part. Can't lie. So Dr. Aaron and I are not versed in this conflict at all. We love people who are, and we've been doing our best to listen to them for years, but we will admit that it's only been recently that we've started to connect some dots and really feel like we have a little bit of a grasp on what's going on. So all we want to do is make a couple quick points today and then kind of flood the notes section with resources we have been paying attention to, and things that we think are worth your time to entertain, so that you can continue to educate yourself empathetically the same way we are. These are some voices we're listening to. I'm going to put some Instagrams, links links to Instagrams in the show notes that people on a lot of different perspectives on this conflict have offered as good resources to understand what's happening on the ground. So, Dr. Aaron, why don't you take it away with some of the coverage you've watched while I was in Ted Land?
Yeah. I just kept like sending her things when I thought they were relevant, and I was like, if you're bored and have time, watch this. Yeah. So I think for me, and I think we should couch this as saying like Israel and Palestine is something, the conflict in Israel and Palestine is something that is talked a lot about in Northern Irish circles.
Yeah. Oh yeah. We should make that point. Yeah.
So we are like adjacently versed in it, in that a lot of people like to draw comparisons between those two conflicts. There's a lot of sympathy and empathy within disparate groups in Northern Ireland for Israel or Palestine. They've been kind of, I don't want to say co-adopted.
No, I will say, I mean, you drive around parts of Belfast and you'll see Israeli or Palestinian flags. Co-opted is probably not exactly right, but I don't think it's wrong either for some of the ways that people feel about it.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of real solidarity, and empathy with the varying sides of the conflict there. So, and as Dr. Kristen said, a couple of our friends, one of my dear friends is a world-renowned expert in a lot of conflicts, but I met her in Queens, and she spent a lot of time in Israel and Palestine. Dr. Julie Norman.
Hi, Julie.
You'll see her on CNN a lot of mornings, early in the morning, live from London, where she lives. But I think that the points that I have had reiterated to me, I should say, are that this is not a religious war. Very similarly to Northern Ireland, the number of parallels I found even just watching things this morning. This is about competing nationalisms, i.e. Israeli nationalism, often called Zionism, or Palestinian nationalism, and the right to own or live on or have land or a state. Mm-hmm. Well, it's really easy to say it's a religious war because the majority of Palestinians are Muslim, the majority of Israelis are Jewish.
And the Israeli state is theocracy-ish. So it's even more easy to do that than it was in Northern Ireland, to be completely honest. Like,
there's a lot of codification of religion in Israeli law. But similarly to Northern Ireland, it is not just a religious conflict. It's certainly not about, as Trevor Noah said, and we'll link below because he did a really good job. It's not an argument over whose prophet is the right prophet. Just like in Northern Ireland, it's not an argument over
which Jesus is the one we worship. Yeah.
Which church is the right church. Yeah. That is certainly a part of it, but it is not the reason for the fighting. So point number one. Point number two, it's very, very hard to find a starting point for the conflict. Again, Trevor Noah did a phenomenal job, and I just had to pause him because I was laughing so hard thinking about Northern Ireland and how many different times and dates we could pick the start of the conflict in Northern Ireland. Depending on whom you ask, it was 1969, it was 1920, it was 1690, it was 800. Like,
I'm in the 800 camp, so yeah.
Which is, so depending on whom you ask in Israel and Palestine, it goes back not a long way or a long way, that is not necessarily as important as what's happening right now. And we've both learned a lot about the changing Israeli politics
and the way that laws are written and spoken about and enforced, which have been evolutionary in the last decade,
odd 20 years or so.
Yeah.
John Green and Crash Course have done a fantastic job as per usual. It's not quite up to date. It's from 2015, but it'll again be in the show notes. And I learned a lot about colonization in Palestine and Israel, which, if you know, on our YouTube, we're doing a Colonizers World Tour. So we were a lot of frantic WhatsApp messages back and forth while Dr. Kristen was in Tedland being like, it's all about colonization. The final point that I would like to make about Israel and Palestine that has become abundantly clear to a lot of people, especially media, and I think we're seeing a shift in the way US politicians are talking about it, not the president, but other politicians, and a shift in how media are talking about it, recognizing the disproportionate level of violence. Both John Oliver and Ali Velshi pointed out, Israeli has one of the best militaries in the world, the Israeli Defense Force. It has something called an Iron Dome,
which I just think of as Ultron. So if you're Marvel,
yeah, I thought it was like in Harry Potter, like when they put
when they have the shield. Yeah, I can only think in fantasy terms because I didn't think this was a real thing. So
it is a real thing. John Oliver, very cleverly said it's like big rockets shoot down small rockets. But yes, Hamas is firing hundreds of rockets at Israel. Fact. Israel has the Iron Dome, and so a very small percentage of those rockets are getting through. When they do, they are killing Israeli civilians. Fact. But the disproportionate level of destruction is being felt in Palestinian areas by Palestinian people, mostly civilians. I think actually all civilians, although it's hard to know whether anyone in Hamas has been killed at this stage. But also the issue of forced displacement of Palestinians, I think, is something for me that I had not spent as much time with as I have this week. And that is a huge part of this. And John Green's video goes into really in depth the way the land has changed hands. That was very passive. The way that Israelis have taken Palestinian land since the late 1960s. And that was one of the sparks that started this most recent outbreak. And so we encourage you to learn as much as you can, to find empathy for everyone. But I think it's really important for us to say, as people who study conflict all over the world, nothing is black and white ever in conflict. But there is a disproportionate level of violence, both on the ground in terms of displacing, blockading, starving Palestinian humans, and physical acts of violence that a lot of people are starting to call on the level of war crimes. So keep an eye out on this. We may have some guests on in the near future to continue to talk about this, as this again, this horrible human conflict has landed at the top of the news list for the 8 millionth time.
And the final point I'd like to make too is that being pro-Palestine is not being anti-Semitic.
Yeah, that's a big one.
And that there is a difference between systems and people.
Yeah.
And I deeply, deeply love a lot of people who claim deep, deep faith in the Jewish faith who are enraged as to what the Israeli government are doing because they are not Israeli. And the message of the United States for a long, long time has been that pretty much anybody who is Jewish should be really thrilled with Israel. And the longer I love a lot of Jewish folks, the more I realize that that's not necessarily a monolithic feeling, or one they're comfortable with even the U.S. having. So even just the statement, the U.S. is a partner of Israel, is actually significantly more complicated than a lot of us were taught growing up.
Yeah.
And there is, I have very strong feelings about Benjamin Netanyahu and his administration, as a lot of people do. I cannot in any way, shape, or form find that there is an excuse in that for any anti-Semitic behavior. So let's hold that intention too. In fact, one of the Instagrams I'm going to link below is Jews for Peace, which is a group of people who are of the deep Jewish faith who are advocating for peace in Palestine. So everything in the same way that they're, in Northern Ireland, the sides, all sides. There are never sides. There are always people. And some of them agree into groups of opinions or viewpoints. But the idea, the word sides is starting to actually become like a trigger word for me in some of these things, because it just doesn't fit.
And especially like the both sides argument that's happening a lot here.
Yeah.
Both to talk about the United States and to talk about Israel and Palestine. And it's worth, I think, saying off of what you just said, not to conflate and to, not all Palestinians are Muslims, not all Palestinians support Hamas, not all Jewish people support Israel, not all
people who live in Jerusalem are, not all Israelis are Hebrew or Jewish or whatever word you want to pick. Like,
we use shorthand to talk about conflicts all the time. And this is something we're very passionate about with Northern Ireland, and making sure to talk about the difference. And so I think it's important for us to do that here too. And your point about not all American Jews supporting Israel is really important as well. And we'll link as well to J Street, which is another pro-Israel, pro-peace organization based in New York.
The other thing too, like, this is one of those things, there was a Jewish holiday this weekend, and I don't know too many Gentiles that know it was a Jewish holiday. Like, there's a lot to learn kind of all over the show. And that this happened in Ramadan is something that is not being talked about in American media enough, to be completely honest, and what Ramadan means and what Eid means. And this is as messy as it comes for a whole host of reasons. The reasons is as messy as it comes is that two of the largest military operations in the history of the world have had their fingers in this from the beginning. So we're going to hit pause on this right now and just ask you to continue to educate yourself, and to help if you are somebody who is very knowledgeable in this conflict or who has been living in these spaces for a long time, please help us educate if you are willing to do that labor with us. We would be grateful for your insight, knowledge, and understanding. I know I'm going to start reading. Mark Lamont Hill has written a book about Palestine. I'll be digging into that this weekend, as has Anthea Butler, and I'll be digging into those soon. So we're going to do, in the same way that we felt we got smacked upside the head with how little we knew about Asian Americans and how little we knew about the Disability Rights Act, we are smacked upside the head again about how little we understand about modern Israeli and Palestinian politics, and we're going to do our damnedest to fix that. But in another conversation of global trauma, the CDC caused some this weekend, when it just kind of out of nowhere told us all we didn't have to wear masks anymore.
If we were vaccinated.
We here at the Good Doctors are confused by this as everybody else is. And we will, just in disclosure, while we are both vaccinated, we have had very different emotional experiences throughout this pandemic. We have different emotional experiences when it comes to health entirely. One of us is much more attuned to some of the negative realities, and one of us lives blithely in ignorance a lot. I'm sure you can pick which one I fall on. I have, my level of self-care is to trust a whole lot more than sometimes I probably should. And so I don't know if I will be wearing masks now that I'm fully vaccinated and I'm told I don't have to out of doors. Because not having to wear them feels really, really fecking good. However, that is not going to be everyone's reaction. It is not even the only valid reaction. And we would like to take this opportunity to remind you that everybody has had a different level of trauma within this pandemic. Everyone will continue to have different levels of trauma. The pandemic is not over. As the CDC has reminded us, we're still figuring this out. We still don't know what's going on. And so we would beg you to continue to be kind.
I read a really great article in the Skim that was about how COVID-19 has affected your mental health. because it's affected all of our mental health. And that was the prompt for this empathy exercise. And just having a lot of discussions, I was very fortunate to see a slightly large contingent of family members I hadn't seen in a long time who are all fully vaccinated on Friday, out in a public place. We did not wear masks at our table. It was celebratory enough that I didn't worry about it. And then, starting to think about what it looks like to be a vaccinated person in this country with these rules, and thinking about level of comfort with mask wearing. The one thing I would point out is and everybody's going to have a different opinion on their level of comfort and their level of anxiety around this. I feel like we should have transitioned more into this rather than the abruptness.
The abruptness was traumatizing, like legit, because it's confusing, it's overwhelming. I don't think good leadership on any level.
It's really confusing for businesses.
Uh-huh.
The state of California has said, we're not going to do this for another month so we can give people time to adjust, which I think is a great idea, because to do it on a Friday, it was like a Friday night, what was it called? And when the administrations used to do that, just drop
a news dump. Yeah.
A Friday night news dump so that nobody would notice it happened, and it just threw everyone's weekend into whoa. I would beg you to consider essential workers during this time. We've had some statements by the largest nurses union in the United States, and also the union that represents grocery store workers and a lot of other essential workers, that this puts them in a precarious position, relying on the honesty of vaccinated and unvaccinated folks to follow the rules. I have already decided for myself that I'm still going to wear a mask while shopping, so that essential workers don't have to wonder whether I'm being honest or not.
Yeah, and that's a decision that I will make as well. Outside is I'm going to do inside outside personally. I'll just say that. So
yeah, everybody, has the right to make their own decisions now based on local, state, and national mandates and regulations, obviously. But I think that's an important thing to consider and to remember. But everybody's going to feel differently about this. Everybody's going to be ready to transition differently. So try and give some grace as much as possible for yourself and others. Try not to judge other people for what their level of comfort may or may not be. Some people can't. We both know people that can't get vaccinated yet because of health concerns or pregnancies. Small children can't get vaccinated yet. All these kinds of things to consider why people may or may not be following these guidances in public.
And it's really easy to get excited. One of our very favorite theater venues, 54 Below, announced last night that they're starting shows on June 17th. Amazing. But in order to get in the door, you have to show your vaccination card. And different theaters are going to be doing different things. It's really easy to get caught up in the excitement. It really, really is. And so we would also just ask you to remember that for a lot of people, excitement still feels very far. And navigation is still where they're at. And some of us don't have to live there as strongly as some other folks do.
That's right. And, we all know this, but it needs to be said, I think, as often as possible. Vaccine distribution has been exceptionally privileged in a lot of places. I know there are a lot of people working hard to get to under-resourced, underprivileged, oppressed communities across the country.
And the world.
Actually, Indian country has the highest vaccination rates. So that's not what you would think, but they've been in charge of their own vaccine distribution. So turns out what happens when you give people agency. But a lot of people haven't been able to access vaccines for a lot of reasons. And so bear that in mind as well. This is a work in progress, as everything is. And we're all at a different emotional place. So.
And speaking of all of this is actually a great transition into boundaries.
I was just thinking that. I was like, this makes perfect sense to talk about boundary setting next.
I'm making a note for the chapter link for our incredible editor, Eleanor.
Eleanor.
So boundaries. Okay.
Boundaries.
Boundaries. last week when we were together, we talked about how you can blame the Puritans for your exhaustion. And now we're talking about some things in the world that make us very exhausted. The main point that I would like to make in order, the starting point to doing boundaries, the very, very beginning thing to me is understanding your own priorities and energy levels and understanding how much stimulus you can take. So Erin and I talk a lot about introversion and extroversion around here because I am about as stereotypical extrovert as you can get. She is almost as stereotypical introvert as you can get. Like we're pretty broad brush folks in that way.
There's many reasons why she was the one on the TEDx stage, but that's a big part of it.
Yeah, like I am exhausted from jet lag, not at all from like expending energy, meeting people, standing on a stage, everything else. Erin would be like in a coma if she did what I just did over the last 4 days. So,
oh God, I would be dead to the world.
And that's in the list of reasons, an alphabetical order that we work really well together. That's near the top. Like it's up there. One of the reasons we've had different reactions to the pandemic has been that I need a lot more people stimulus than she does. And so some of the pieces of this that have been harder for me that were not hard for her and vice versa. Mm-hmm. But more than ever, what it all comes down to for me in terms of boundaries is knowing who you are, what you want, and what you can take.
Yeah.
And those are not things that anyone can figure out for you. They are not things that are even easy to communicate to other people. So I'm going to share just a little bit about how I've come to this understanding. And then Erin, I think you should talk about hamster balls because that was really, that was good and important. But for me, I, as an extrovert, have an incredible amount of privilege in a lot of the spaces that I'm in because I'm charismatic. I can command a room. You can throw me up on stage in front of a bunch of teenagers and like entertain them for a bunch of minutes. And so I was never at the same time, whereas that's like a real privilege because I got attention and I got power and I was given leadership positions, which I really hope I was responsible with. I think I'm a good leader, but who knows if I am. And at the same time, I wasn't ever given the option or taught that I had the option to say no. Mm. And I wasn't ever taught that I could turn those things down. Some of this is the particular faith environment I grew up in where we don't allow boundaries a lot, and burnout is a statistic we throw around as though it's like an acceptable thing we can never fix. The profession I tried to go into, by the way, is youth work. And the average level of burnout for youth work when I got into it was 18 months, that somebody would have that job for 18 months and then they would have to have another job because the burnout was so excessive. And this was thrown around very often as a like job perk for those of us looking for future work. Like, oh, don't worry, that job will be open in 2 years. It wasn't like, hey, this is something that's really terrible and we have to fix. And so, yeah, Ange, our dear friend Angela just said, you're allowed to say no. And she laughed because Ange and I have had these conversations a whole lot of times. Right. But so that's the downside, is that I have been very much programmed by the cultures that I grew up in to be a perpetually performing show pony. And to never understand the ability for me to go, you know what, actually in this moment, all of these people are draining. And yeah, I understand that normally I can keep going and keep doing this, but right now I can't. Or I actually can't do that. I've just always been told that I have to, and I'd like to reformat some of my boundaries now. So here's some things I've learned about myself in terms of extroversion. I absolutely do need people I draw my energy from interactions with other people. When I was younger, I thought that meant interactions with absolutely every other living human being, full stop.
All the humans.
I'm like, a plug and play. You just throw me in the middle of a bar and I'll be fine. And here's what I have learned is that that's not actually extroversion necessarily. At least it's not for me. I deeply draw energy from people and relationships and interactions with people I trust. Interactions with people I don't trust is neutral to negative. And so in order to guard my boundaries, I have to understand, for instance, that like my mom came with me to TED because I didn't want to be in a hotel with everybody else, because if they were all going out for drinks, I would feel super pressured to do that, even if it wasn't the best decision for me. Whereas having my mom with me would remind me that I am a human being and not a human doing, and I'm allowed to say no. And so that's a huge difference. Now, Dr. Erin, stimulus from, I mean, there's probably only like 2 or 3 of us that don't drain you on a regular basis. Like it's a pretty small list. Her interaction with humans and energy is almost polar opposite of mine.
Yeah, and Dr. Kristen referenced hamster balls, if that threw any of you guys off. Sorry, not sorry. I thought it was hilarious. There's a great article, and I'll make sure and dig it out. I think I have it bookmarked somewhere. There was in HuffPo 10 years ago. I don't even know. 2013. That wasn't 10 years ago. That was about how, like, kind of graphically illustrating how introverts experience the world. And the guts of the graphics of the cartoons was that hamster balls, introverts need a hamster ball of personal space. And it was this beautiful visual of like literally a person in a hamster ball. And it goes down to the way we process energy and what drains us and what gives us energy. And very like what Dr. Kristen already talked about, for extroverts, stereotypically, everything is a spectrum. We all fall at different areas. I am a much more social introvert than a lot of other introverts that I know. My brother is more on the introverted spectrum even than I am. But I only like to be social in certain circumstances with certain people. I don't like thrive and just throw me in a bar. No. Hives. But it is how you process energy, how you recharge those batteries. And so for Dr. Kristen, she has found out that recharging her energy levels is in human interaction. And she qualified that, which is, a level of self-awareness and emotional intelligence that we all need to build within ourselves. For me, I find social interactions with everybody pretty draining. There's a couple people that don't drain me as often or all the time. But just being social, just talking, just being around others drains my energy. And so I need to get that energy back in my hamster ball of personal space. And for me, kind of the reverse of what Dr. Kristen grew up with, I always felt ashamed that I didn't want to hang out with people, or I didn't know how to say, I'm just too tired to be around humans. And I felt like people would take it personally. And so I put myself in a lot of social situations that were draining, that didn't need to be. And so this article about the hamster ball of personal space, I sent it to our friends in Belfast, Dr. Kristen included, and saying like, this is me. This is how I interact with the world. And so when I say to you, I'm too tired to go out, or I really just need to be in my hamster ball, don't take it personally. It's not about you and me not wanting to spend time with you. It's about how I regain that energy so I can go do fun things in a few days. So it was a really, really helpful frame for me. And I'm much better now at saying things with love to my friends, although I haven't had to cancel plans in 15 months. So all of a sudden I'm a social butterfly, a vaccinated social butterfly. But it's important to build that in. And like, we've worked really well and really hard to communicate that, which I think is the other side to your coin that you were talking about. Like it's a lot of self-awareness, boundary setting. It's a huge level of reflection, thinking about what you need and how you need it. But the other piece of that puzzle is communicating it, which is hard, but it's essential. You have to be able, thanks, Jay. Jay says, this is super interesting. You're welcome, Jay. We'll talk about introversion and extroversion for days. But it's been a fascinating case study that we've done on ourselves as we've tried to figure out this business partnership. And, Dr. Kristen is really good at saying what she needs from me when she needs it. I am good at saying to her when I need breaks. She's good at accommodating that when possible, with the understanding that there are times when I cannot say that. But she does her best to communicate that to me in advance. A lot of introversion is preparation, having time to prepare for things. So she'll say to me, you know, when you're out here visiting next Thursday is going to be an all day thing and I can't change it and I need you to be on. And I'm like, okay, I can prepare for that. It would be cool if Wednesday night we don't do anything. And she's like, I've got you. We'll order some Chipotle. So it's a constant negotiation, especially with people who have very different boundaries, but you have to be willing to communicate. And I think that's the biggest thing for me is learning a way to talk about it was really big.
Yeah.
But then you just have to be able to talk to people and to recognize what those boundaries are and respect other people's boundaries. I think the more we have learned about introversion and extroversion, the more we respect other people's boundaries and what they need and understand this idea of how you process energy. I think it changed for both of us, like the way we engage with people. And, you know, Dr. Kristen is a more stereotypical extrovert, but she needs time away from people where she's not on stage and where she's not performing as well. And so just to say that, like, she's perfectly fine all the time in social situations, no. And I love being social with my friends, and like I can seem really outgoing and people are like, you're not introverted, you're so outgoing, you're so bubbly, and I'm like, no, and then I hibernate for 2 days. So I think it's important to realize that there's no box either, and we talk about everything being on a spectrum, but I think that's the other thing I'd like to say is recognizing that, you know, there are qualities of those things that we all have, but we both suffer from anxiety, your level higher than mine, but it manifests in different ways that interact with that introversion and extroversion too. So
yeah, I mean, mine is like a constant perpetual, it never shuts off hum, and I feel like sometimes you can dip down, and that's like one of the differences between us.
Yeah,
like,
and mine is mostly social anxiety.
Like, yeah, and mine is anxiety about like if the sun will come up tomorrow. Like mine's anxiety about everything. So
yeah, so like that you know, my social anxiety directly impacts my introversion as well, and they're not, you know, they kind of overlap in different ways.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of other puzzle pieces that go into the way we interact with other humans and what we need. But it's so important for all your relationships, professional and personal, to understand where you fall. And we'll link some books that I've found really helpful if anybody wants to learn more about introversion. Susan Cain's book, Quiet, is fantastic. And one of my Bibles, I learned a lot from her.
And this is like, we've decided we're going to talk about boundaries over a couple different weeks in a couple different settings, because there's like, sometimes we need chunks to digest. So the first step that we have for you in setting boundaries is learning about yourself and learning what you need and when you need it. And we're going to come back next week and have a different conversation about actually communicating that with people who are not your best friend. And strategies that we use with each other that we then learned in gaining confidence with each other, then learned how to use with other people. Yep. And what we did. We would love your questions between now and then. Replay crew, live crew, whoever. If you want to know some specific stuff, we'll bring some more tips and tricks as we go along next week. Next week, again, we will be with you on Tuesday. We know we're just throwing wrenches and everything, but the replay will be perpetually available because we frequently don't know actually how to delete things from YouTube anyway. So it lives up there. Dr. Aaron's got some social time next Monday, believe it or not, and it's not with me, which is just a delight of post-pandemic life. That
I'm leaving the greater city limits for the first time.
I don't know how to process this information.
Me neither.
So we'll see her post adventure next Tuesday, and then the following Monday here in the United States is a federal holiday called Memorial Day, and we take the day as a day of rest. And so we'll see you Tuesday, June 1st. After June 1st, we'll be back to Mondays, we promise. But right now we'll be for this week, next week, and the week after, we'll be hanging out with you on Tuesday mornings. Any questions you've got about boundary setting, we would love to answer them. And in the meantime, if you would like a really great example of boundary setting, hit up our Welcome to My World video with Trisha Brooke, my speaking coach, who is one of the fiercest boundary setters I've ever met in my life. And she talks about it in her video. So we'll make sure to link that below.
Yeah.
Friends, it's been a privilege as always. Replay crew, make sure to tell us where you're watching from. We always love to know. Yep. And we'll see you guys next Tuesday morning.
Tuesday. We can diagnose any day. So
yeah. Facts. Bye.